Before laws were written, before badges were trusted, and before towns had names worth remembering, the American frontier existed in a state of controlled chaos. Settlements rose overnight, driven by gold, land, and opportunity, but order rarely followed. Justice was not something delivered by courts or judges. It was something seized by the strongest hand or the fastest draw. If a man wronged you, there was no guarantee a sheriff existed to hear your complaint. More often than not, the only response was personal retaliation. This environment bred fear, mistrust, and endless cycles of violence that defined daily life in frontier towns. Disputes over land, cattle, money, or honor were settled through intimidation or bloodshed. A man's reputation mattered more than any written law. Those known for their toughness survived, while the weak were exploited or erased. Outlaws moved freely between settlements, knowing that law enforcement was sparse, underfunded, and often outgunned. Even when a sheriff was present, he was usually a lone figure trying to impose authority on a town filled with armed men who did not recognize his power. In many cases, the badge was more a symbol of intent than actual control. This chaos made formal justice nearly impossible. Jails were rare, courts even rarer. Trials, when they occurred, were often public spectacles driven by mob sentiment rather than evidence. Vigilante justice emerged not as a solution, but as a desperate response to lawlessness. Groups of citizens took enforcement into their own hands, but without structure, accountability, or restraint. The frontier was not lawless by choice. It was lawless by necessity. And yet, this fragile balance was about to be disrupted, not by a new lawman, but by a technological leap that no one fully understood at the time. Before we go further, ask yourself this question: can true justice exist without the power to enforce it? And if enforcement comes from technology instead of morality, what kind of justice does that create? Welcome to Western Tales Official, where we explore the real forces that shaped the American West. If you value deep history, untold stories, and the truth behind the legends, make sure you subscribe and become part of this journey into the past. The Henry rifle was not just another firearm. It was a quiet revolution wrapped in brass and steel. Introduced in the early 1860s, it shattered the limitations of single-shot and muzzle-loading weapons that dominated the frontier. While most rifles required time-consuming reloading after every shot, the Henry could fire 16 rounds without pause. In a land where seconds decided life or death, this advantage was overwhelming. Accuracy, speed, and sustained firepower gave its user a level of control previously unseen in civilian hands. Reloading was simple and fast, requiring far less movement and exposure than older firearms. This meant fewer mistakes under pressure and greater confidence in confrontations. For the first time, a single individual could hold off multiple attackers without relying on brute strength or superior numbers. Early adopters quickly realized the rifle's potential, and word spread fast. Those who carried a Henry were no longer just armed. They were dominant. However, the rifle's impact went beyond combat. Manufacturing such an advanced weapon required precision, supply chains, and industrial planning concepts that mirrored the very order the frontier lacked. Transporting Henry rifles westward was a logistical challenge, and their presence signaled the arrival of modern industry into a primitive world. This was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of progress, efficiency, and control entering an untamed environment. Frontiersmen, lawmen, and vigilantes alike recognized the shift. The rifle did not make men braver, but it made courage unnecessary. Power was no longer about fearlessness. It was about preparation. And with preparation came predictability, something the Wild West had never known before. Consider this. When technology decides outcomes more than character, does justice become fairer or simply more efficient? As the Henry rifle spread, traditional frontier combat became obsolete. The iconic duel, two men facing each other at high noon, was no longer practical. Sustained fire rendered such displays suicidal. Power shifted from individual bravado to strategic positioning, coordination, and planning. Those who adapted survived. Those who clung to old ways disappeared from history. Vigilante groups quickly recognized the advantage. A handful of organized men armed with Henry rifles could overpower gangs twice their size. Sheriffs and marshals, previously symbolic figures, suddenly gained real authority. They no longer relied on reputation alone. They possessed enforceable power. This discouraged open defiance and reduced random violence, replacing it with calculated resistance. Historical accounts reveal multiple instances where Henry-armed defenders repelled outlaw raids, protected settlements, and enforced emerging rules. Yet this power was not always used ethically. The same efficiency that restored order could just as easily enforce tyranny. Justice became less about right and wrong and more about who controlled superior force. The rifle did not choose sides. It empowered whoever held it. And in doing so, it reshaped the moral landscape of the frontier. Law was no longer an idea. It was a capability. This raises a difficult question. If justice depends on firepower, is it still justice or simply dominance with justification? With violence becoming more controllable, settlements began to stabilize. Organized law enforcement emerged not because society suddenly became moral, but because it became possible. Marshals could enforce warrants. Sheriffs could detain criminals without immediate retaliation. Town councils could establish rules, knowing they could be upheld. The Henry rifle reduced the need for individual vigilantism. Why risk personal vengeance when structured enforcement could deliver results with less bloodshed? Jails appeared, courts followed. Written laws gained meaning. The transition was subtle, uneven, and often brutal, but it was real. This shift marked the transformation of the frontier into something recognizable as society. Authority moved from individuals to institutions. Justice, while still imperfect, became standardized. The rifle did not create morality, but it created consistency. And consistency, more than virtue, is what builds civilizations. The Henry rifle left behind a complicated legacy. It reduced chaos but normalized violence as a tool of order. It paved the way for future firearms and shaped American gun culture for generations. More importantly, it accelerated history. What might have taken decades happened in years. Did it bring true justice? Or did it merely replace disorder with controlled force? The answer lies somewhere in between. The West was tamed, but at a cost. And that cost continues to echo through history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how technology reshaped the Wild West, subscribe to Weston Taylor's Official. Here, we don't just tell stories, we uncover the forces that changed the world. Because history isn't just about who pulled the trigger. It's about what the trigger changed.